Hey everyone, welcome to another video. I hope you're all having another stress-free day. And today, this is the first video that I'm making for the inferior limb osteology section. But before I go into any of the bones or the bony landmarks and the structures that we need to learn, I just want to apologize because I realized that when I was editing the last video that I made, I had two typos. And this is referring to the video where I discussed the landmarks of the bone section as well as the parts of a developing long bone. So I do apologize for the two typos I wrote down. In the description of that video, I did put the correct spelling of those terms, so hopefully you guys don't, get all too upset at me. But with no further ado, let's go ahead and begin inferior limb osteology. Now, when I began the osteology video for the superior limb, I discussed the principle of girdles. And we talked about the pectoral girdle and went into detail about that. But right here we have a structure called the pelvic girdle. And the pelvic girdle consists of three bones. And they are two os coxae and one bony sacrum. The os coxae are appendicular bones, and the bony sacrum is an axial bone. There is a bone that is attached to the bony sacrum, and it's this tiny bone that you can kind of see right here. That bone right here, that's the coccyx. That is not part of the pelvic girdle. Again, I say there are only three bones that are part of the pelvic girdle, which are the two os coxae and one bony sacrum. So the coccyx is not part of the pelvic girdle. Okay? Another way you can say os coxae is hip bone. However, when you're in the anatomy labs or you're discussing this chapter with your peers or your professors, it's most often referred to as os coxae than hip bone. So, just so you know, those words are interchangeable, but os coxae is much more common. The hip bone is unique because it is actually three bones fused together. During development, they were three isolated bones, but as you grow up, your bones mature and they fuse together. And in this image, I'll show you where they were. So this is one hip bone or one os coxae. And we had at first three bones that were different from one another, but then they fused together through ossification. And I'm going to illustrate where those three bones were. The first bone we have is the ilium. And this outline right here displays the ilium. The next bone we have is the ischium. And the ischium kind of comes down right here. And all of this is the ischium. Sorry, this is the ischium. The last bone is this section right here. And all of this is the pubis. So let me go ahead and write those down. Ilium, pubis, ischium. Those bones fuse together and it forms the os coxae. Now let me go ahead and discuss another set of landmarks that we need to learn before we go into much detail. Let me switch over to this image. When discussing specific landmarks on the hip bone or the os coxae, we always parent them back to either of the three bones, the ilium, the ischium, or the pubis. However, there are actually two landmarks in particular that are formed by all three bones, and I'm going to show you that right now. Right here, we have a landmark that is divided evenly between all three bones. And then right here we have the ilium again. Since this landmark is made up by more than one bone, we parent it back to the os coxae. This entire region right here is called the acetabulum of the os coxae. Because it's made up of more than one bone, we have to parent it back into the entire bone to itself. The next landmark that is made up by more than one bone is this space right here, this hole. This hole is called the obturator foramen, foramen meaning hole, of the os coxae. Now those are the only two landmarks that are parented back to the os coxae. There are more landmarks found in the acetabulum, but we won't go into those landmarks right now. We're going to go back to the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. So going back, let me go ahead and clear these notes. Starting with the ilium, we have this landmark right here. It's probably the thickest part of the ilium, and it covers up this entire region right here. This is going to be the body of the ilium. Just above it, we have this fan-like structure. This fan-like structure is the wing of the ilium. Within the wing itself, there are a bunch of other landmarks that we're going to cover. The first one being this one right here. This right here is an articulation site where the ilium and the bony sacrum articulate with one another and form a joint. It kind of looks like an ear. Because of that, this landmark is called the auricular surface of the ilium. This ridgeline that's found next to the auricular surface of the ilium and spans all the way across the wing, this is a crest, and it's called the iliac crest. Now these are just capital I's. I don't usually square them off like this, but I can see how it can be confusing, so I'm going to do that from now on. So yeah, that's the iliac crest. Right here, you can see a depression. What do we call depressions again? If we remember, we call depressions fossas. And since this is a large fossa found on the ilium, we're going to call it the iliac fossa. And we don't have to parent it back to the ilium because it has iliac. Same goes for the crest. Now for the next landmarks I have to cover, I have to eliminate these notes to make more room. You can see these little projections coming right here, and then there's two on the posterior aspect back here. These are called spines of the ilium, and each one has a specific name depending on its location. And I'm going to explain how that works. Right here we have two projections that are found on the anterior aspect of the ilium, and then these back here are found on the posterior aspect. So to be more specific, these landmarks are also categorized by if they're superior or inferior to each other. For example, this iliac spine right here is called the anterior superior iliac spine. This one is the anterior inferior iliac spine. Does that make sense? Because this one right here is more superior than this one, it's going to be called the anterior superior iliac spine. And the same pattern applies for the ones in the posterior aspect. This one is going to be the posterior superior iliac spine. And then this one, as you guys can guess, is the posterior inferior iliac spine. Awesome. Now within the ilium itself, it has three surfaces, and we already mentioned one. It was this one right here, the auricular surface of the ilium. But there are two additional surfaces. The first one being this surface right here. This surface is facing the pubis and as well as the bony sacrum. Since it's the surface kind of facing anterior and kind of medially, they called this the sacropelvic surface of the ilium. This is better illustrated in the previous image that we have over here. You can kind of see what I was talking about, how this surface is facing the bony sacrum as well as the pubic bone. Right here we have the sacropelvic surface. And you can see how it's kind of facing medially and anteriorly, facing towards the bony sacrum as well as the pubis. Hope that makes more sense. So again, this is the sacropelvic surface of the ilium. The next surface found on the ilium is on the posterior aspect of the ilium, shown in this image. This surface on the posterior aspect of the ilium is called the gluteal surface of the ilium. Why is it called this name? Because this is where the gluteal muscles originate from. There are three different types of gluteal muscles and they all originate from the ilium. So this is why it's called the gluteal surface of the ilium. Returning back to the other image, there are a few more landmarks that we need to cover found on the ilium. There's a roughened patch right here, just above the auricular surface of the ilium. This roughened patch right here is called the iliac tuberosity. You don't have to parent it back to the ilium. You can, but you don't have to because it has iliac in the name. Finally, the last bony landmark that we need to know for the ilium is this notch right here. This notch right here is called the greater sciatic notch of the ilium. Why is it called the greater sciatic notch of the ilium? Because the sciatic nerve goes right in between this notch right here. So they're calling it the greater sciatic notch of the ilium. And those are all the landmarks for just the ilium. We can go ahead now and move on to the ischium. The ischium is the most inferior of the three bones and is found right here, like mentioned before. The body of the ischium is right here. It's the thickest portion of the bone itself. And it actually helps make up the acetabulum of the os coxae. This point right here is another spine. Remember how we talked about these spines right here? Well, this is the spine of the ischium. And since there's one, you can just put down spine of ischium. Good. Now, there's another term that we need to learn, and it's called ramus. Ramus means branch. Branch, like branch on a tree. This right here, this region, kind of helping form the obturator foramen of the os coxae. This is called the ramus of the ischium. Now the next few landmarks we need to see are in the posterior aspect of the os coxae. Okay, again, let me clear these notes real quick. Again, right here we have the ischium. Here's the ramus of the ischium. Here's the body. It's the thickest part, and it helps form the acetabulum. Good. Right here we have the spine of the ischium. Let me label these real quick. All parented back to the ischium. Right here we have this kind of flattened portion. And this is actually the part of the os coxae you sit on. This right here is called the ischiatic tuber. And all it is just this flattened, blunt portion on the posterior aspect of the ischium. Last landmark found on the ischium is this notch right here. So right here we had the greater sciatic notch of the ilium, but right here we have a smaller notch. This smaller notch is going to be the lesser sciatic notch of the ischium. Now, ischium and sciatic are actually the same thing. Sciatic refers to the ischium, so you can actually just be fine saying lesser sciatic notch. But I like practicing parenting because if I don't parent, I usually get the question incorrect. So I always just extra parent back to the ischium. So lesser sciatic notch of the ischium is correct, or you can just say lesser sciatic notch, and that's fine. Regardless, those are all the landmarks found on the ischium. Again, you can kind of see right here, this is the lesser sciatic notch of the ischium as well. Excellent. Now we can go ahead and move on to the last bone found on the os coxae, which is the pubis. The body of the pubis is found right here. And you guys can probably see a trend that's going on. It's probably easy to see that the body of these three bones is the thickest or girthiest part of the bone. So this is the body of the pubis. Now, unlike the ischium, the pubis has two rami or ramuses, okay? Ramus meaning branch, and there are two of them. So let me go ahead and draw an outline of the pubis again. Good. We have two rami, one right here and one right here. This one being the superior ramus of the pubis, and this one being the inferior ramus of the pubis. The pubis also has a surface like the ilium does, and it's found right here. This surface is called the symphyseal surface of the pubis. Of the pubis. Now let's go ahead and look at this image over here. The pubis is beautifully demonstrated in this image. Let me go ahead and clear the notes so it's not so distracting. So again, to illustrate, here is the pubis. And I'll draw on the other one to help illustrate what I'm trying to say. So right here we have this surface. And on both pubises, we have symphyseal surfaces facing one another. So where I have these little checkered marks, that is the symphyseal surface of the pubis. Now, there is a term where these two pubises kind of form a crest. This right here is the pubic crest. And the pubic crest is located right here on the anterior portion of the bone. Now, right next to the pubic crest, as well as the symphyseal surface of the pubis, there is a small bump found right here. And it's kind of angularly projected. It's kind of going out at an angle. These little projections are called pubic tubercles. Now the very last landmark found on the pubis is found back on this image. This landmark is located right on this ridge line right here. It's kind of hard to see, but right here, right where it has the sharpest edge, that is going to be the pecten of the pubis. And again, it's on this ridgeline found on the pubis. And those are all of the landmarks found on the pubis. So we've actually covered all the landmarks found on all three bones. However, I did mention there's a few more landmarks found on the os coxae that we need to cover. And that is actually found on the acetabulum of the os coxae. So right here we have a beautiful view of the acetabulum of the os coxae. Now, the acetabulum also has landmarks that are just parented back to itself. You don't have to what I call grandparenting, and I'll show you what I mean by that. The acetabulum is this region right here, and again it's formed by all three bones in ossification. The acetabulum of the os coxae has a surface, and it looks like this crescent moon right here. Because of that, it's called the lunate surface of the acetabulum. You don't have to parent it to the os coxae, so you don't have to say lunate surface of the acetabulum of the os coxae. That would just be too much. You can just parent it back to the acetabulum. But if you're just talking about the acetabulum in itself, you have to parent it back to the os coxae. Good. Now we can go ahead and move on to the next landmark. So we have the lunate surface, and then we have this depression right here. This depression is called the acetabular fossa. The next one is this ridge, and I'm going to change colors to better illustrate it. The ridge found right above the lunate surface. This ridge has a name, and it's called the acetabular margin. And finally, the last landmark found in the acetabulum is this notch right here. It's almost like a gap between these two parts of the lunate surface, making this little gap. This is called the acetabular notch. Now, if you guys study on real bone or a bone specimen or a bone model or whatever you guys are using, it's going to be quite easy to determine where the acetabular notch is. I'm very limited with the images I'm provided with, so if you go and study at an open lab or just lab in general and you get your hands on one of these models, it'll be quite easy to see the acetabular notch as well as the other landmarks found on this bone. And that's it. Those are all the landmarks that we need to know for the os coxae as well as the three bones, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you guys later.